Well, hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're excited to talk about our current culture's fitness frenzy and a little bit of a different angle during this panel session. So before we dive in, we've got a really great set of panelists today, and so I'd say they all have equally, very different but equally valuable backgrounds for today's conversation. So why don't we kick off with some really brief introductions, and then we can jump into the conversation. So maybe Jay can kick off.
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Jay Decoons. I'm the CEO and president of The Bar Method. We're a boutique fitness franchise focused on the bar space. We're one of the pioneers in the space. Prior to The Bar Method, I've been in boutique fitness running a chain of yoga and Pilates studios called YogaWorks, based out of Santa Monica.
Good afternoon. I'm Brad Olson. I lead member experience at Peloton, a fitness technology startup in New York. And before joining Peloton about 2 years ago, I led global strategy and operations for the Starwood Preferred Guest loyalty program.
Hey, I'm Brian Kirkbride. I am the founding partner of FitLab, which is a holding company that builds and invests in companies in human performance, so fitness, sport, cognition, nutrition, that sort of stuff. Before FitLab, I ran the external ecosystem for Nike on the digital side.
Great, and I'm Aarti Kapoor. I'm your moderator for today, and I'm an investment banker at Olson Company, covering consumer retail and specifically healthy and active living brands. So let's just have a little background on why we're even in this room today. I think whether or not you're a fitness fanatic, I think any consumer can notice how much wellness has really been top of mind for today's consumer. And wellness can be a bunch of different things. It can be fitness, what you eat, what you drink, frankly, what you're wearing, mindfulness, et cetera. But really, somehow fitness has taken so much of today's consumers' mind share, and there's been so much buzz around fitness and what's out there in the market. I'd say so much innovation. So fitness has been a ways to healthy living, but also has really turned into a big social phenomenon. It's a way that people socialize with one another, and instead of grabbing a drink after work, they'll go to a class after work. And in addition to that, it's become a social phenomenon by being a little bit of a status symbol and representing this aspirational lifestyle. So today we're really going to focus on that part of it, fitness as a social phenomenon. And this trend first emerged with the explosion of boutique fitness studios, so names like Bar Method, SoulCycle, Flywheel, Barry's Boot Camp, and Orange Theory Fitness starting to pop up all over the country. And then we saw a big wave of digital fitness. So many of these brands, plus many new brands, starting to offer fitness streaming into your living room or on demand on your laptop. So what's been interesting is obviously the rise of digital fitness means we have a much bigger addressable market and more people can be engaging in fitness. But there are still some subjects of debate when it comes to digital fitness, which is when you talk about community, is digital fitness really able to provide that same level of community that we see in boutique fitness studios and in gyms, or should it just give up and try and be something else altogether? So today we're really going to discuss the difference between online and offline fitness and what that means from a community and connectivity standpoint. So let's get started. So why don't we start off with Jay? Jay, I think with Bar Method, which has been primarily brick and mortar to date, you could be an interesting case study for us because you do have that nascent digital presence. So why don't you tell us a little bit about how the online business is doing and if you're seeing existing studio customers taking classes online and how that demographic might differ, and then online if you're seeing folks interacting with one another in any way.
Sure. So we've had an online offering for about 3 years now. From the start, it was always designed to really complement and really augment our studio business. And our core business is really delivering that in-studio experience and supporting our studio owners, which are franchisees. We're a franchise system. So knowing that is our core, we really chose to make sure that it could extend the value, not replace that value, because we think that there are aspects of the in studio that are particularly unique, in particular around our technique, which is, if folks know bar, it is very small isometric holds. And an inch up or an inch down makes all the difference in how effective you are. So that is really hard to translate online. And what we really pride ourselves is to focus when you're in studio on both verbal adjustments and physical adjustments from that instructor. So, like I think some of you may have experienced if you've ever done a private session with a trainer, you cannot push yourself that as hard as if you have somebody right there who's an expert and can kind of help you to form correct. So we tried to build ours to extend the community, extend our brand when you can't get into the studio because of time constraints and commitments that you have, that you can still keep the continuity with us, and it helps you to stay connected for when you can get back into the studio. So it really is by design right now to really supplement and complement our core offering in the studios.
That makes sense. Do you see any difference in terms of, incremental consumer coming online and any difference in demographics, or do you think of it really as supplementing your core consumer base?
We do. Right now we see it largely, and part of this, I don't think we are casting the net on that business as far and wide as we probably should, but I think it largely is existing students that are coming in, and then there are students that are seeking out the best quality instruction, and then we're leveraging our reputation by being one of the pioneers in the bar fitness space and being seen as having the highest quality technique. But it's not so much that we are really focusing on, at this point, doing larger audience building beyond kind of those people that are seeking us out for the quality of the technique.
Great. Brad, so let's talk about Peloton, because Peloton has really created this tremendous empire in the market and has really been a category creator, bringing together hardware, software, community, so many things under one roof, under one brand. So a lot of people are wondering, is Peloton trying to convert the SoulCycle or Flywheel goer or Barry's Bootcamp goer now with the treadmill, or do you see this again as a supplement? And if you could tell us a little bit about who the Peloton consumer is, I think that we would all find that really interesting, and how Peloton consumers and how Peloton as a brand really interacts with other parts of the studio fitness market.
Sure. Yeah. When John Foley, our founder, started Peloton in 2012, he said from the beginning, we're not competing with the brick-and-mortar studio business. And if anything, we find that they actually help us prime the pipe for Peloton buyers. So if you're familiar with SoulCycle or Flywheel or Barry's Bootcamp or Orange Theory or Bar Method, you get that instructor-led group boutique fitness is energetic and there's elements of community. They're basically doing the job for us. And those are people who are much more likely to buy a Peloton. So we love them. There's no competition there whatsoever. But I think we have created a white space because we aren't competing with the traditional exercise manufacturers for home use. We survey our members after they buy a bike. 8 out of 10 tell us they weren't in the market for home exercise equipment before they bought a Peloton. So we feel pretty confident that we're creating something new and different that's more akin to what you would have in a studio environment than what you would have with what our founder calls dopey home fitness equipment with a little red dot going around the oval. So.
Do you see a difference in terms of what that core consumer looks like from either a demographic or psychographic standpoint, or is it really just similar consumer but someone who needs more flexibility and convenience from a time and location standpoint?
Yeah, it's really that. We don't see a huge difference between people who love the brick and mortar experience versus those who are in our membership base. But there are life moments, whether it's moving from the city to the suburbs or having kids, when Peloton suddenly seems to make a lot more sense. So I think of my friend Jess in LA. She used to go to SoulCycle 5 days a week, totally obsessed, riding on the podium, all that good stuff. And then she had a kid, and that was game over. So she now rides Peloton 4 days a week at home, and she goes to SoulCycle every Sunday when her husband watches their baby daughter. And so it doesn't replace it, it really just is supplement it for a different life stage.
Great. Now, let's think a little bit about growth opportunities. I mean, obviously, in fitness, we've seen so much innovation and so many new entrepreneurs coming into the marketplace, kind of seeing all the mega trends in health and wellness, and a lot of folks just wanting to jump on the bandwagon saying, all right, I'm going to quit my day job that I didn't love and do something that's a passion project, and what kind of business should I start? And so I think originally we saw a lot of new boutique fitness studios popping up, but of course, we've now seen that digital can be a much more expansive universe. So, Brian, as you think about being an investor and where there's growth opportunity, based on where we are today in the market, would you put your money more behind a brick and mortar concept or a digital concept or frankly a hybrid model
And I'm sure it depends on the brand and the business, but generally speaking, business model, how do you think about growth opportunity?
Yeah, so Jason Jacobs, who was the founder and CEO of Runkeeper and ultimately sold it to Asics, had this tweet like 3 weeks ago, and it basically said, I think it's amazing that people will put Peloton or Orange Theory bumper stickers on their cars. The best fitness companies aren't building services, they're building tribes, right? And I actually think that's exactly right. And at FitLab, that's what we want to do, right? We want to help build these tribes. I actually think that's harder to do digitally, frankly. We know we can look at kind of some of the best aspects of real life offerings or kind of what behavior change models would tell us we need to have, right? In terms of goal setting and accountability and feedback and social support and maybe competition based on, depending on where you are in this athlete pyramid. But I think for the vast majority of us, that feels way different when we walk into a CrossFit box or the bar method or Orange Theory or whatever it is than it does, after work with our app in the garage or wherever we're doing that, right? And so that said, so that says kind of, hey, the boutique, there's a reason these boutique offerings kind of are compelling for people because, look, the best workout for most people is the workout you can get them to do, right? And there's something magical about some of these experiences, I think. That said, while we do think there are opportunities in the boutique world, I think the vast majority of the service offerings we get involved with at FitLab, so the kind of new training brands we're trying to help build, will be digital, or at least will be digital first in the sense of starting with digital. And I think that's for a few reasons. One is kind of, as you mentioned, right, the boutique landscape obviously is more mature, it's more robust than the digital landscape. And you can kind of go, well, that sounds weird, right? Because there's 20,000 or whatever the right number is now, different digital apps, fitness apps. But the reality is the vast, vast majority of those aren't building tribes, right? They're kind of like, hey, here's your workout program. And hopefully you manifest the self-efficacy to go figure out how to do that. And so when you look at kind of like who's really building a holistic service that has a chance of kind of motivating people and inspiring people and building this community and building this depth that you can experience in the real world, I think it's literally a handful of companies. It's certainly less than 20% or less than 20 companies, I think. So I think there's more white space on the digital side. I also think that we're entering a space. Is there a way for us to not have that?
We have a remote participant here. You just mute the.
So I think because it's harder to build, I think there's more opportunity, right? I think there's fewer real competitors for a deep service. I think the third thing is that, there is a demographic change, right? We are entering a realm where for the vast majority of these offerings, the kind of heart of the consumer bell curve now is digitally native, right? I think the gap for them between what they experience emotionally in a digital environment versus a physical environment is just not as big as it is for someone my age, Jay's age. So I think there's that. And then I think the last part of the question really is kind of what you mentioned at the end from a hybrid standpoint. I think kind of having a real authentic physical offering that's truly merged in a deep way with the digital offering, and I think Jay kind of said this, right? Like most of them on the physical side, the digital is an augment, right? It's kind of a wrapper that's meant to kind of help, but it's to support your physical offering. Having a real hybrid where it's genuinely authentic, both digitally and physical, I think is certainly something we really want to see built at FitLab. I don't think we've seen it yet, which I think is interesting. But if I had to bet, and I guess that's my job, I would say that we're going to see the success come from digital companies going into the physical space much more often than we're going to see physical companies successfully go into the digital space. So that's a lot, but if I had to kind of take it all, I would say, look, the majority of what we're going to do is going to be digital first. I think that's where there's more white space. But I think, you can look at Peloton, you can look at a few others that have this super deep, authentic, immersive experience. I don't think there are a lot. But I do think, on that hybrid side, we are seeing some companies on the digital side start to get there on the physical side. You're seeing communities that have, where their users have spontaneously, organically kind of created physical training spots, right? Where they use the app or they use the programming, but they actually have created this real world experience, which I think it's an interesting first step.
Great. Let's actually talk a little bit more about Peloton, because I think it's a little bit of an enigma in the industry, and have Brad maybe start off by just explaining what it is, just so everyone knows. But clearly a force of nature in the fitness and wellness market. So because it's been so hard to cultivate community digitally, maybe Brad, you could tell us, how Peloton has been different from other brands in doing so, and what kinds of tools and features you see, because from my understanding, there is a lot of interaction among remote users. So maybe you could just tell us, what is Peloton and how has it been so unique in mastering this community outside of the studio and digitally in someone's living room?
Sure. So Peloton is bringing instructor-led group boutique fitness into your home. Our first product was the Peloton bike, which we started delivering to members in 2014. So it's a beautifully designed indoor cycling bike with a 22-inch HD sweat-proof tablet. And you can take up to 14 live classes a day that we produce in New York. We have over 8,000 workouts on demand. And I think to your point, Aarti, what makes it a little bit different is there's an interactive leaderboard. So you're competing with, if you want to, thousands of other members around the country or in your house. So my husband gets up and rides in the morning, and I ride the same ride later, and we compete, and he wins. But we do, and it's fun, and it keeps me motivated. But I also ride with friends around the country. I'm going to add these two jokers to my profile tonight and try to compete with them when I get home. We also have an app. It's largely a companion app, but we do have a paid service there as well. And we announced our Peloton Tread at CES in January, which we'll start delivering this fall. I would respectfully disagree a little bit around community in real life. As someone who went to thousands of boutique fitness classes before I joined Peloton and belonged to a well-known gym for years, I couldn't tell you the name of a single person I ever met there, except maybe an instructor or two. And I think what's different and perhaps counterintuitive about Peloton is that on our platform, our members are building community in a way that we've never seen in any in real life brand. So whether that's following each other on the leaderboard and competing, which the majority of our members do, or it's our official Peloton rider page on Facebook, which is just a closed Facebook group that our members started and my colleague JV took over a couple years ago. It now has 75,000 of our most passionate members, over half of whom are active on that profile every day. And they're sharing their fitness goals, they're scheduling rides, they're doing their before and after pictures, whatever helps them stay motivated. They're also debating politics. They're debating gun control. Sometimes it goes way beyond what we want it to, but that's authentic community. And there are tons of I would say hundreds of informal tribes started by members for special interests. So Peloton moms, road riders, the 5:15 a.m. tribe, like insane stuff that people find these commonalities with other Peloton members around the country and engage in a way that I don't think they would in a brick-and-mortar studio. Because how would you know if the person on the mat next to you gets up early or is a mother or not, or likes to ride outside? So I think the digital offering is actually a huge enabler for building that community. But to Brian's point, I think the hybrid is really where it's at. And our showrooms, which were really meant to give members an opportunity to try the bike before they buy, have really transformed into community hubs where our members around the country meet their online Peloton friends and take their milestone rides and celebrate one another's achievements. And they also come to New York. So we have an annual Home Rider Invasion event, which again, JV runs. And last year we had 670 members from 33 states pay their own way to New York to ride with each other, to meet one another, to meet their favorite instructors. And this year we have 1,000 spots and they sold out in 3 hours. And so when I think about what makes our community so powerful, it's that combination of digital enablement, but also those in real life events.
Great, that's helpful, and it's interesting because with boutique fitness, not only do people cite kind of community as a key driver, but they also cite accountability as a key driver. But with Peloton, with the digital leaderboard, you actually have the same, if not more, accountability because people can actually see your numbers versus in many classes, most classes they can't if you're on the ground in a studio. So it's interesting that those are two things that people tout about being there in person, but Peloton has somehow mastered both digitally.
I just want to mention that because I'm more challenged to think about another fitness modality where it translates so well, because part of what makes cycling in particular is that you have the variables like in the cadence, and you have the effort, and you have your tension on your knob. So you could really kind of have that dialed in. And a lot of other fitness modalities, whether it's in bar or yoga, it's really hard right now with technology just to really kind of calibrate and have that accountability. So for us, again, I think an inch makes such a difference. I have no doubt with technology that we're going to get there, especially with virtual reality. But I think our focus is, that is our unique differentiator for us, is that an inch or an adjustment, a hands-on adjustment or a verbal adjustment in the class makes all the difference. So I think you guys are nailing community, and you have some unique aspects that you're clearly capitalizing on. I think in other modalities, it just doesn't translate as well. So we're tending to kind of focus on what we know makes us unique and special, and it's those adjustments. It's really that attention to how we can physically and, again, verbally correct people when we see opportunities.
With brick and mortar, there's been a lot of focus from the consumer side on brand, and brand identity, brand values, brand ethos, color scheme. People have gotten tattoos of boutique fitness logos. I actually know of someone who got a Bears Boot Camp logo tattoo, and then they changed their logo, which is hilarious. But anyway, so people are obsessed with brand. But how about online when it's in your living room? And Jay, maybe you can speak to this because there's so many competitors. There's free content on YouTube. There are free unbranded apps. There are a bunch of these kind of private label offerings out there. So do you consider just the random YouTube bar class a competitor with Bar Method's online bar class, or just how do you think about the importance of brand online?
I think it's extremely important, and I think the reason is that there is a lot of content out there that you can get on YouTube and elsewhere, and I think if anything, we're all suffering from just having too much content, and we're really looking for certain brands, authentic brands that have the history to help me curate and really prescribe and take me on a journey to get better. And so I think Brian referred to some of those points, but I think that is the power of a brand. When you can establish that trust through, in our case, our founder story and how she's been working on our technique since the 70s and evolving it to be focused on safety and efficacy, that's what people really want to hear. They really want to see it, not only in a story, they really want to see it kind of through the experience. And I think that's really hard to do and replicate if you don't have an established brand, you don't have the support behind a brand to continue to evolve and go deeper with your content. And if it's just a smattering of offerings, I don't really see that as a competitor.
Mm-hmm. So I want to switch gears a little bit and just talk about the broader kind of digital landscape. So, Peloton is kind of its own category. Then you have your more traditional online and streaming offerings like a Beachbody, Daily Burn, et cetera. But there's also kind of another form of fitness community that we've seen take off. Kayla Itzines and Emily Skye and other big personalities, those two, for those who don't know, are Australian fitness personalities who happen to have garnered millions of followers, many of which are in the US, and seemingly done so overnight. Kayla is known for her program and kind of Instagram posts that are before and afters that are really impactful, kind of pre-Kayla and X number of weeks in, and you can track progress. And so she's created this insane community around that. Emily Skye also has her own programming and her own online community. These are largely Instagram driven. So I guess my question is, and I'll open this to the group, do you think that there's something real to that, or do you think it's a confluence of kind of right place, right time with millennials, Instagram, fitness kind of all lining up nicely in today's landscape? Do you think that counts as a real digital community? Do you think that's monetizable? Do you think that's, that can continue to be scalable?
I'll start. I actually do. I think it's super easy to dismiss kind of offerings like Kayla's or Emily's. But I think, if you go back to kind of this idea of creating tribes and creating community, the programming may or may not be programming I believe in, but like when you look at the depth of that community, the engagement, the support that they provide each other, the kind of real attachment they have to the brand, it's really, like, the engagement's staggering. Mm-hmm. The numbers are also, like, the revenue's real. So, I think some of those questions have actually been answered. And I think a lot of it, too, I would say, with a lot of these sorts of offerings, I think the competition is Netflix and pizza, right? Like, both of which are pretty awesome. And so I think if the message is, hey, it's 5:30 in the morning, it's just you and the road, go be a hero, like that's a really big gap with Netflix and pizza, And I think, again, my belief for the vast majority of people is the best workout is the one you can get them to do. And so if you can kind of shrink that gap by programming that they love, or by these brands or personalities that they love, by a deeply engaged community, I think that's real. I for sure think that's real. So, and look, the reach that those guys, I think Kayla's at 10 million or so Instagram followers now. That's a brand.
I'm one of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with Brian. I think the quality is a big question mark for me. I'm not the core bikini body demographic anyway that she's going after. But I do think what she has is real. I think the Instagram following, not just the number of followers, the engagement you see with every post that she does, or the post that she reposts from her followers. I also think she does the hybrid thing really well, right? She goes on tour. Yeah. She sells out stadiums. And those look, when I see them online, they look like revivals. When there are 4,000 women doing burpees together and she's shouting, positive stuff. It looks like a revival. Mm-hmm. And so I think she has found something sustainable there, and I think we'll see more and more of it in different fitness modalities.
And I would just say, I think it's also a healthy gateway to coming into studio. So, meeting people with where they're at, giving them great content that is in a safe place for them, where they can really develop a sense of self and be confident, and then potentially be able to feel so confident that you actually want to go and seek out that tribe or be in a studio that you can really be excited to be in. And not everybody's there. That's also one of the realities of our programming, is we really try to focus our online videos to really meet people with where they're at. It's a lot slower, focus on the fundamentals. It's very intimidating for some people, in particular guys, to go into a bar class unless you've been able to work on some of these core exercises so you can develop that level of confidence and competence.
How would you, and again, for whoever wants to respond, how would you respond to things like what Brad alluded to, concerns around efficacy of digital programs, safety, obviously a lot of folks trying this stuff at home or trying it at home because they don't necessarily have the fitness level to show up in a class, and they might be a little intimidated. Do you think that's a real concern, or how do you think about kind of the efficacy and safety components of the at-home market?
I'll just start with, I think it depends on the modality in fitness. In our case, we definitely have to make a lot of modifications, and people do not have maybe a ballet bar, but we give them suggestions on how to safely, which height and what to use to replace weights. So we definitely cater to making it still safe and effective. I think in other modalities, it just depends. It kind of really scares me that somebody is just kind of setting up their own CrossFit gym on their own and just following it just seems really unsafe. It's sometimes unsafe enough when you're actually there under the watchful eye of a skilled trainer. So I just think it very much depends on the modality, and I'll let others speak to that.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it depends on the modality, it depends on the instructor, it depends on the person working out. I've done mat Pilates classes, and I don't go anymore because I invariably screw it up somehow and hurt myself. I go to one-on-one private lessons for Pilates because those little adjustments matter. I think in other modalities, it's probably a little bit safer, whether it's cycling or running. You may not need that level of adjustment, but there are boot camp classes you can go to where no one watches you. I've hurt myself on the floor at Barry's too. Maybe I'm just a klutz. That might be the takeaway from this. But I think the answer is really just it depends.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add is Brad's point there at the end, which is just, I think bar method is an outlier in terms of the quality of instructors. I think you can go to a CrossFit gym or an Orange Theory or any Barry's, any place we've kind of mentioned today, and see people doing really, really bad stuff, theoretically under the watchful eye of a trainer. So I think the quality control, as any brand scales, right, you're going to have quality control issues, whether that's in a digital environment or a physical environment.
So I'm going to throw out a different question, which comes from a somewhat personal, experience, which is that I think over the last couple of years, there's been so much positivity around healthy living, wellness, fitness, and obviously people, fitness is fun with friends. People are going with their buddies, their coworkers, and making it a social phenomenon. But as I alluded to earlier, sometimes it's almost too much of a social phenomenon and becomes a status symbol, and people have to post about every single workout that they've done and what time they did it, and it's a little bit of a showing off game. And so sometimes I'll say, today's my morning, I'm going to sleep in, and then I look at my Instagram like, oh, I see everyone has done their workout already and feeling bad at myself. I'm like, maybe I should, and maybe I don't need a day off. And so do you think there is a little bit too much of this kind of online socialization of fitness? Do you think there's any part of this that's backfiring, where people feel like instead of moving towards being more well and more healthy and balanced, they are feeling kind of a social pressure, whether it's I should look like that or I should be working out that hard, et cetera? Do you see any of that kind of going a little too far? I from a female perspective, sometimes I would say yes, but curious to hear what three men on a panel have to say.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think in probably every aspect of life, right? But certainly from a fitness and wellness side, I mean, we can talk about the imagery, but yeah, there's a ton of pressure that creates, again, across every aspect of life. I think, I think the broader issue is probably more what is considered fitness and wellness, right? Which maybe gets outside the scope of this panel, but, are people not taking rest days when they should? Yeah, for sure, right? Do in-person and digital offerings need to kind of figure out how to reframe what performance is and what fitness is and all of that? Yeah, absolutely. But I think that's honestly in part why some of the things like Kayla and Emily have developed such strong followings, right? Because they do tend to take a much more holistic view. It tends to be much more supporting people at meeting them where they are and supporting them across it versus, look, you walk into a CrossFit box, it's time to go, right? So I don't know that it's particularly worse from a digital offering standpoint. I think it's just kind of true across everything now.
Yeah, I think I would agree, and I think also what we're seeing is that the digital platform can also be, a good space for that back and forth discussion about this topic. It's interesting. Emily Skye, who recently had a baby and is one of these, fitness personalities with a massive following, who used to be, have her six-pack in every photo, is now showing, hey, look, it takes a while, and I'm a couple months, postpartum, and I still don't have my body back, and now started a whole conversation about it. So it can be, a tool for education as well. But it's just been interesting to see how, a consumer audience who was not that focused on fitness suddenly became super, super focused on fitness, and then almost too focused on fitness because of the social pressures, and now maybe there's a little bit of reality setting back in. Those are just my observations so far. So a couple, I guess, just a broad question again for the broader panel, but what do you see as the greatest opportunities ahead for digital fitness and studio fitness more broadly, just given kind of all the frenzy in the market, this flooding of new entrants? Some would argue that we're too crowded and we've kind of peaked, but where do you see things going from here?
I'll start with us. I think part of it is, first, we have to always just recognize what we're really good at and what others are really good at. So I think that has to stay our core focus. Is it always has to be around the safety and efficacy, in that I just don't see us moving anywhere away from what makes us unique around the modifications and those adjustments. If we can translate that online, I am all for it. So continuing to be inspired by stories like Peloton, being inspired by a lot of what's going on at this conference with new technologies, ways to maybe bring in more of that two-way so we can bring that feedback in. So there are some applications of virtual reality that I'm just frankly really excited about for our brand, that where if we really do our great job, if we're great with visual, and we can kind of somehow recreate also that physical adjustment side of it in a virtual classroom setting. That's really exciting for us, and I think we can be a leader in that space from a content standpoint. We might not be the leader in delivering the technology and having the full ecosystem under the bar method, but I would sure be interested to partner with the companies that could extend and leverage our expertise around the instruction.
Yeah, I think I would have to agree with that, Jay. I think there's a lot of opportunity coming up with VR, with image recognition. I see announcements for things like Mirror, which I'm sure some of you have heard about. If they can really capture your body and help provide those micro adjustments that are important in so many modalities, I think that could be super interesting. I think for us, though, we have a similar approach, which is know what we do well and just keep doing that. And it's different than what Bar Method does, of course, but for us, it's producing amazing quality content and software that engages people. There are a lot of digital fitness startups that put a camera in the corner of a brick-and-mortar studio, and frankly, their content's terrible, right? They're very different businesses. If you go into a SoulCycle class, it's a very different experience than if you come to our studio, which is a 4-camera, multi-million-dollar television production facility. And it's not as much about the people in the room. There's 50 bikes in the room. It's about the 5,000 people who are taking the workout from home. And so I think what's going to be the key to quality is knowing what you do well and doubling down on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think those are the main points to me. I mean, I think we see a lot of, on the digital side, I think there's a few things that hopefully we'll see less of, maybe is the way I'll address it. I think that I think that the space kind of started with a lot of like, look at this really cool stuff we can do with technology, right? And we can sense this, or we can tell you when you're fatiguing, or we can do all of this stuff. And I don't know how relevant it is for the vast majority of people. I think what we're hoping to see are more and more offerings that do what Brad and Jay said, which is pick your niche, right? Figure out where you are in that athlete pyramid, figure out who your consumer is, and develop an offering that is optimized for them, right? And I think in the digital world, we have the ability to do that more effectively because, we can say niche, but that may be a, 50 million revenue niche for a company revenue, or it could be 100 or 200 million. And it's also easier then to kind of extrapolate that and build, almost like what Beachbody would be if it were started today, right? Instead of kind of MLM, multi-level marketing as your superpower, you have this ability to create these really engaging, targeted brand experiences for a specific consumer. But why not have 10 of them, right? If that's what you're really good at, and then target and focus and build out that portfolio that way. So I think there's going to be kind of almost what these guys said was kind of stick to what you're good at. I think that's what it is, but we can find ways to kind of scale that. And hopefully just less technology for technology's sake. Just focus on building stuff that helps people get better, whatever that is for your specific niche.
One more thought I have on that point, just around kind of what we'll see going forward. I mean, just with some of the businesses that I've been working with, obviously there's now an international component that folks are starting to explore. So I think a lot of these trends around boutique fitness started, frankly, in New York and LA, and then went to other tier 1 cities in the US, and every investor that I've interacted with said, can this be more than, a tier 1 phenomenon? And then, companies like an Orange Theory Fitness and Bar Methods, and yes, you can exist in a suburb and be profitable. And so we saw that proliferation around the US and multiple markets. And now we're starting to see these international concepts pop up, whether it's, Barry's Boot Camp going to London and Dubai, or, imitation Barry's Boot Camp in London and Dubai. And so the same phenomenon is taking place there. Brad, I know Peloton has kind of, seen a little bit, or maybe a lot, around kind of international demand. Not sure how close you are to that, but do you have any color on kind of the online demand globally for digital offerings? Because we've clearly seen it on the brick and mortar side.
Yeah, the demand's definitely there. On our social channels, every time we post anything, there's guaranteed to be at least 2 or 3 comments, like, when are you coming to fill in the name of the country? Mm-hmm. So there are already people following us with that expectation, and I know we're not alone. We're not the only brand with that demand. So when John started our company, he said, we never intended to be a bike company, and that's true, and we have our second product coming soon, the Tread. We also never intended to be a US-only company, but we're trying to grow in a thoughtful way. So I think at some point, yes, but no immediate plans.
Mm-hmm. Great. I know we wanted to leave some time for folks to ask questions, since most of you have been to a class, plan to go to a class, own something at home. So would love to hear from any of you who might have questions around anything we've discussed today. Go ahead.
I was wondering if I could just get your thoughts on the recent $80 million valuation for Rumble, in terms of what you thought drove that, and sort of what you see as the future of boutique boxing.
Yeah, I mean, look, I won't tell you I understand how they got to the valuation. I think Rumble's awesome, maybe to step back. I think the class...
Just for the room, the question was around the 80 million or so rumored valuation for Rumble, which is a relatively new boxing brick-and-mortar concept that started in New York, steps away from Peloton, actually, and scaled a little bit quicker than the average boutique fitness studio, and also sold a stake much more quickly than the average boutique fitness brand to Equinox of all players. So certainly an accelerated trajectory. So the question's around kind of what led to that.
And I think, look, I think what it speaks to most is kind of the demand from the larger incumbents, right, in the space for kind of innovation for this boutique offering. When you talk to a lot of the kind of executives at these larger big box offerings, the goal now is to kind of have all the boutique offerings you can have under one roof, right? So that's who they view as their competition. So I think you can certainly see the strategic desire in that valuation. I think you're seeing a few things. There's at least 4 concepts, right, on the franchise front from boxing concepts. Mayweather's launched one, a few others have launched. I think it's a really good class format. I think it's a little bit new, it's a little bit unique. I think it's a really good workout, and it's kind of fun to do, right? And if you go back to kind of trying to create these compelling experiences, and your competition is Netflix and pizza, I think that's it's more fun for a lot of people than kind of just walking in and doing the fitness.
I would add a couple thoughts, because I also cover the boutique fitness market. I'd say I think they just have Rumble looked at kind of all the other successful stories in the space and took the best of all the different worlds. So, they were smart about, getting great real estate that had extra space, because most people complain about brushing up against a bunch of sweaty people when they get out of class. So, they checked that box. They, heard consumers on saying it's really tough to be in a class with that many people and actually know what to do. So they put screens up around their class saying, here's what this group is doing, here's what that group is doing. So check that box. And they have a marketing machine behind them with Eugene, who's one of the co-founders, and frankly just been brilliant in marketing with his restaurant group and a bunch of other stuff he has going on. And so they have the right connectivity and kind of branding know-how. And so I think it's just, it's right place, right time, but also kind of just doing a lot of the right things that they realized other folks weren't doing. And then I think, the questions around white space. I mean, there's so many boutique fitness studios in most cities now. And so it's, which kind of vertical within boutique fitness has not yet been owned by one player. So there are certainly a handful of players in the boxing vertical, but no one necessarily owns that space. It's very difficult to get into cycling because of market share that's owned by a couple players. Same thing with boot camp. Bar is pretty crowded as well. So I think boxing kind of still had that white space and room to run and kind of opportunity to own the market, because no one does yet. So I'm sure that factored in as well.
Hi, I'm head of content creation for Fitbit, and so I had a question with some of the stuff you guys were saying, because I thought it was interesting that you talked about exploring kind of a niche audience, and I'm intrigued. Two-part question in 2 different ways. One, how did that balance that you guys have seen in each of your companies with obviously looking at a product that's one-to-many, but also if any of you started exploring any of the AI personalization stuff, and like how you kind of balance that, building a sense of community with, making that niche tailored one-on-one product as well. Second kind of totally different question is, I'm intrigued also how you guys also balance content spend and not getting lost in kind of, the YouTube, Netflix model of billions and billions and billions of, money that you spend on the door. And those are 2 very different questions, but I'm intrigued to obviously hear all your opinions on that. So, thank you.
I'm happy to start. We have not started exploring AI at all. I think it's still a ways off. I think we're going to watch what some players do in other industries and see how scalable it is before we explore it. I think what we do is try to personalize the interaction versus the training content. So you think about getting on a Peloton bike, there's the leaderboard. Our instructors have a tailored set of data in front of them while they're in New York, so they can see it's Brian's 100th ride or it's Jay's birthday, and call them out and help provide that sense of community and accountability, which is pretty cool. And we're working on new functionality that allows our members to interact with each other across the country, so it's not reliant on the instructor. So not exactly AI by any stretch of the imagination, but it does provide that sense of 2-way communication.
So I would just say, well, first off, I'm a big Fitbit fan, and I would love to explore ways to partner with companies like yours, because even for our business, even to help us to educate consumers. I think there is a misnomer in our space that by just spiking your heart rate, you're actually burning fat. It's actually not true. There's actually an optimal cardio phase where you're actually in a fat burning phase, and you're actually at a lower heart rate than most people think. So I think those are excellent things for us, which we know that our class and where our BPMs are with our music, and where we just are really keeping our the heart rate to match those BPMs, that it's at a more sustainable, optimized zone for burning fat. So how we think about working with partners like yours, like you, and to educate and actually reinforce some of our value proposition is exciting.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I'd say on AI is I think that's one area where I think personalization is super important, right? Obviously, I think that that can be accomplished. It doesn't have to be super heavy AI, really deep, like real AI, right? Like that can be algorithms, and it can be a kind of progression. I do think it's nice when it's responsive. And to your point about kind of how does that combine, I think it can combine really well with kind of the social support in the community and the other things that people are experiencing with this, and kind of looking through the lens of a digital experience now. I think that can be fun. I don't think you need to be kind of a class format, you know, a group X format to experience those elements of support and competition and all that sort of stuff, right? There's some great digital offerings that, you know, even within your coach environment, you're progressing up levels, which is viewable to kind of the rest of the community. You might be ranked on a leaderboard for a given workout within that community, similar to how you are in Peloton. So I think those things can actually combine super well. Again, it's just, for me on those, it's more making sure that you're very tight on who your consumer is. And then I think it can all hang together. Where I think it gets where people get in trouble is they kind of walk down the FE pyramid and try to stick the same offering in a different consumer. And that's where things try to kind of fall apart to me. And then the question on content was just how not to kind of get stuck competing against YouTube and Netflix.
Yeah, it was with more format, I was looking at, I know, how you guys balance out kind of content spend with, like, I'm biased in this, but I've dealt with a lot of the conversations of obviously, like, how much content is too much, or where's that right spend on content? And I'm just intrigued, you know, for as much as you guys can share the kind of a mass audience, you know, where you balance that kind of content is king philosophy with obviously on the flip side, getting lost in that game of just more kind of thing.
Sure.
That fine line you guys balances.
I think in our case, it's always one of those things that the power of a small budget, right? There's something about that. We don't have the budgets that a YouTube has. So by design, we have to be really pick our spots and be really prudent. And also, we had this at YogaWorks when we launched My YogaWorks, our online video offering. We had set up a production studio. We had instructors coming out of our main studio on Main Street in Santa Monica, coming into our production studio, and we were just realizing we were churning through and producing so much content that it was way too much, and we were having great content that was just getting lost back in our queue, and people couldn't discover it in a way. So we slowed that really down. To still, it's very important to showcase new and fresh content, but we clearly didn't need to be producing as much content as we thought. I actually think it's just more important that it's introduced in a predictable way, and it's not necessarily always just content.
Yeah, I think, sorry, just from our perspective, I think it's, even though we do spend a decent amount now on content, because that's what we pride ourselves on is world-class content, we are very disciplined in what we produce. So we've tried a lot of things. We don't do a lot of those things anymore because we look exactly at which rides are being taken by whom, the bounce rate, the completion rate. We read every single piece of member feedback we see on social, email, support, and we feed that back to our content team. And because of feedback like that, we've introduced new ride types, shorter rides, some longer form rides here and there. Heart rate zone training was a big one that we sort of tested, and then it was so popular we put the heart rate zone monitors like on the touchscreen itself. Power zones is another one that we've sort of tested, and it's grown. So I think you can be really disciplined even if you're spending a lot to make sure you're spending on the right things.
I'd also say I think today's consumer wants best-in-class brands with niche-focused expertise. And if you're trying to be everything to everyone, then you kind of lose that that power of your brand, because you lose your identity. It's, who are you targeting? What are you trying to offer to the market if you're trying to offer every modality for every end consumer? So I think, it's also figuring out what actually aligns with your brand ethos and with your core consumer. No, we had a question up here and then one back there as well.
Yeah, actually my question goes around building this very strong connection between the user and the brand, building tribes and building this connection where it might even go to a point where people tattoo the logo. Do you think that is really scalable to a point where it becomes a mass market product, where it's really accessible to everyone? Because part of this connection comes, I think, also from feeling special. You have a certain similarity with the other users. As you try to scale up or make your product more accessible, I think you also run the risk of watering the brand. So is that even possible within one brand?
So for the room, the question is around, do you dilute the brand's potency when you are scaling up? Because some of that brand value comes through exclusivity and kind of scarcity value. So when you become accessible to everyone, are you still as powerful in terms of that connection with the consumer, or do they see you as kind of having sold out, going mass? Any thoughts?
I think it's really hard. I think that when you see kind of the large brands, right? So people get Nike tattoos all the time, right? And when you're selling a product, I think that's doable because you can create a lot of marketing messages that target different people. When you're selling a service, I think it's really hard, right? I think that you have to be kind of a large niche, right? I think you do need to pick your spot on this athlete pyramid and create your service for that user, right? And I think, if you are talking about a pretty disciplined, focused athlete, maybe training for an event, that's a very different consumer with different pain points and challenges and goals than, a more mainstream weight loss consumer. And so to try to create this community, this offering, that is perfect for both, I think there's, you can kind of, there are similar people that maybe works for, but I think in general, that's a really tough fit. And I think that's why you haven't seen some of the big brands like Nike and others really create massively successful digital solutions, because they have to kind of figure out offerings that are at least somewhat relevant to hundreds of millions of people at a time. And so I think the way that you're going to see some of these emerging brands get to hundreds of millions of users is, again, more through creating distinct communities. So multiple offerings under their umbrella, but kind of staying with kind of a targeted solution for each of these communities is my bet on how we'll really see. And that's not, there's going to be, right, there are going to be people that are able to do it, right? I think you could look at Peloton and say, hey, they're super relevant for a bunch of different users. And actually, Brad made a really interesting point prior to this about how they specifically choose and select their instructors and their classes to target different consumers, right? So I think it can be done under one offering, but I think that's more the exception than the rule, would be my gut.
I'd also just say super quickly, I think some of these brands in boutique, on-the-ground fitness have kind of multi-tier models where, their strongest offering that has most consumer engagement would be on the ground and, with flagships or in tier 1 cities, but then they can scale with a digital offering, but that digital offering is a little bit watered down, and so still leaves something that's aspirational and left to be had for the consumer, saying, oh, I wish I could go to the class in New York or LA or Boston or Chicago, but I guess we'll do this online thing for now. But they still want to have that experience. There's still some scarcity value and some brand kind of strength that comes from that. I know we have a couple others.
Sorry, I just want to say one more thing on that. I think when we talk about these large niches, though, we could also say CrossFit is a niche or other things are a niche, right? You can build really robust, meaningful, large businesses in these niche opportunities. Just because it's not touching 200 million people doesn't mean it's not a huge brand and a big business.
Mm-hmm. I know we had someone in the back. Yep, go ahead there. Yeah.
Hi, I'm a government consultant, but I'm here because I love ClassPass and going to group fitness classes, and I believe fitness is more fun with friends. My question today is about the role of the instructor. As someone who kind of caters my entire schedule around the instructor who's teaching the class that day, and I'll follow people around the city. I live in DC now, and people teach at multiple locations. and you really feel the attachment with the instructor. Can you guys talk about the role that the instructor plays in your brands, and really interestingly how the difference between the in-person instructor and then the virtual instructor as well?
Sure. I'll start on the in-person. So we want to celebrate those instructors. That's our product. So it's something that we are, when we're hiring them, we're looking for the alignment of values, and are they really going to see it as a symbiotic relationship where we have an opportunity to celebrate them and recognize them, what makes them so special, as also they're really connected to the larger community and they're just not using it as a platform for themselves. So if you could really foster that balance and celebrate that balance, it's gold. That's really what you're focused on. So it's something for us, and I in particular, when I was dealing with this in the yoga community in Santa Monica, where it very much is that following, is that you also do want to make sure that there's the consistency in our technique, the consistency across the experience from location to location. In certain more guru-based systems, and in particular yoga tends to have that history. It could be all about the cult of the yogi or the instructor. And so as long as there's a healthy balance, we're really always excited about that.
Yeah, I think from a digital perspective, the answer is basically the same. We celebrate our instructors. We need that healthy balance between the instructor's personal brand, not trumping the broader brand. But I think to your earlier question about how you scale, it is through tribes and through instructor affinity, because you may not associate with a certain instructor or even the brand overall, but our lead instructor, Robin Arzone, has more Instagram followers than we do as a brand, right? She has her own following of people who are passionate about how she instructs and how they relate to her. And we have, thousands, tens of thousands of members who associate with each of our instructors that way. So I think it's super important. We celebrate it, we maintain that balance, and then that'll be an ongoing challenge, I think, but it's largely a benefit more than a challenge.
Yeah, just from a business standpoint, I mean, a lot of things that investors look at when they review these business opportunities is, talent management, because talent is critical to success of these companies. So how can you get that talent? How can you train that talent? How can you maintain it and make sure that people aren't going off the rails when they've been there for too long? And then how do you retain those people and keep them happy? So generally with those star instructors, kind of letting them play a bigger role if they want to with studio openings, et cetera, that generally keeps them happy and engaged and they'll stick around. But part of the reason you're chasing certain instructors around, scheduling wise or location wise is because you don't want to have the same star instructor at 9 a.m. or 7 a.m. every day in the same studio, because people will get attached. And so kind of mixing up the schedule makes sure that there is some kind of forced variation for the end consumer, because not everyone has flexibility in their schedule, and so that way they won't get too attached. I know we have about 2 minutes, so maybe one really quick question, and then we got to wrap up, unfortunately. All right. They're both pointing at each other. Go ahead.
I know you mentioned, let's not do technology for technology's sake, but you also acknowledged you need cycling, for example, that there are some metrics like power and cadence and more quantification of that experience that have led the ability to have some more competitive, more interesting interactions in an online space. What else have you guys seen recently, or are you watching in those technical advancements that you think will bring some of those more unique experiences either to cycling or other modalities?
I can't say that there's a sensor and kind of some sort of metric that we're watching and kind of think really solves it. I mean, honestly, for a lot of people, I think just getting in-session heart rate, where people don't have to wear a strap, right? But ultimately get it around their wrist, but where it's still kind of, obviously there's a lot of noise and movement and sweat and all that stuff with IR sensors. I think if we can make real heart rate in session not as full of friction, I think that's less of an issue for Peloton and others, but I think that would be helpful, because right now there isn't really a great way to quantify activity work for the vast majority of systems. That would probably be the only kind of metric that would be interesting to me right now. I mean, there's a lot of people doing hydration and lactate and all of those things, and there's a space for that, but not from a mainstream standpoint.
Yeah, I would say to think beyond biometrics. Just keeping track of how often you show up and work out and do anything is a valuable metric. We've started sending year in review and month in review updates to our members, showing them when they worked out, how many minutes. I mean, this is stuff that doesn't require sensors, but it helped drive accountability and comparison and competition, and that doesn't require a ton of technology, but it's very effective.
Great. I know we are out of time, so thank you all so much for your time today. This was great. Appreciate it.